Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we're coming to the end of chapter 8, and we were looking at the different types of paths, the different ways to liberate yourself. And when your path becomes polluted with desire-ridden activities or activities, you have to gain the meritorious, you have to gain the effects of that meritorious deeds, whether it be, if they're negative actions, you'll gain the effects of that. If they're positive actions, you too gain the effects of that. And a spiritual aspirant isn't truly, when they've moved along their spiritual path, isn't looking for the merits, the effects, the heavens. They want to surpass that. But yet all of us will be looking for the heavens. When you do anything, you're thinking, what am I going to get out of it? Don't even realize it when you do it. What am I going to get out of it? Then only I will do it. Even in this sort of knowledge, you'll be thinking, what am I going to get out of it? That's why I would come. Better to think, what can I put into it? Wherever you take from, can I put back? Well before you actually go to take it. This has got to be the cultivation of that yogi. But we generally, everything we do, what can I take? So this section is, underpinning this section is selfish, unselfish, and selfless activities. There's generally themes throughout the topics which we look upon, and they may be called different things: path of the moon, path of the sun, Krama Yoga, Brahma Loka, Swarga Loka, Indra Loka, Pitra Loka. There's all, but they're just meaning varying degrees of unselfishness or self-centeredness or selflessness. Selflessness, when your value, when your activities are going towards the self, they're focused on, you're using your subtle intellect to that goal of liberation. And anything below it, worldly, even though maybe noble, is still may have shades of that selflessness in it, but it's predominantly unselfish. So even if we can get onto that and we reap the benefits of that activities being unselfish, it's noble. But if the focus can be maintained to going towards liberating the self, getting to your truth, getting to your freedom, into that permanence, if it can be focused on that, then you don't get caught up and then going back. It becomes a permanent holiday rather than a fortnightly holiday. So that's what we're after. So we don't want it to be that we just keep going back into our limitations, because then there's a potential to cultivate more desires. So we've got to, whatever the situation is, got to exercise a little bit of objectivity and be a little bit of a sakshi, that actor on the stage. Even if things don't go right, even if you put in wrong activities, just keep that vision. The best or worst of us can get out of this if you have that conviction to your conscience, to that higher value. So, any questions before we go ahead? Okay. Let's go 26.
शुक्लकृष्णे गदीहिते जगतः शाश्वते मते एकया यात्य नावृतम् अन्यया वर्तते पुनः.
Renu, if you could read that verse. Thank
you. These bright and dark paths of the world are verily deemed eternal. By the one, a man goes not to return. By the other, he returns again.
So, both the paths, the dark and the bright, they seem eternal. So, one is eternal, really said to be eternal in the sense of that path to the truth. And the other one, the path within the world, it equally seems as though it says it means that you spend like 4.32 billion years to that estimate of years. I don't know where they exactly get it from. I'm not a mathematician and I haven't investigated that, but I believe that there's some relevance to it. If anybody wants to explore it, go ahead. We're just taking the idea and what's written here. So it seems, a night seems eternal. So if you go through constant desire-ridden activities, you enjoy the fruit, but you then return after those merits. So it's a constant up and down when you're doing worldly, when you're in the world. So unless you do all your activities detachedly, it will be eternally in the world. You keep getting the benefits. So it's, even when you do your karma, if you're doing it for that name or fame or position or some recognition, or you think it's still a very worldly activity, no doubt it will refine you if you've not been doing any karma at all. You know, if you've been doing all your work and your vocation for a pay or for your own, there's nothing wrong with the pay, but for your own self-interest, for your own family, your own little enclave, then, you know, you get that kick, but that's all you get. And it doesn't really spiritually evolve you. So you get the merits, you enjoy the heaven, and you come back. So unless you've got that capacity in you that you build in yourself to not be swayed by the likes and dislikes, and you look at your obligation with that ideal, with something of truth in mind, you're able to then set the task at hand to be a little bit detached. You can take that brighter path, that path which leads to no return. Or maybe return because of the way that some things are done, but you're on that route which follows on after you've had the merits, goes towards that no return. So these both seem eternal, that direction towards the world or this direction. So you have to be investigative enough or explore enough, be adventurous enough to delve within your own self and understand the poignancy or the potency of it, the potency of your actions in doing so, and the poignancy of why you've got to do it and why you're here. So that takes that adventure, spirit adventure, that Wandamanasacharya, that exploration. And in having that spirit, you've got to act on it in your karma, in your backing it with your knowledge, having that feeling of devotion. You don't just become a cold person when you're a sachi or you're objective. You become very much human. So you choose. You've got to have a powerful intellect, a subtle intellect to guide you in order to get off the path of the worldly eternal, which comes to a nice story, which I'm using what Swamiji tells actually in this verse, I can tell you. And it's about a story of Dwarkapalas, two centurions who were guarding the gates of Vishnu, and a sage comes. And they stop the sage and say, hey, you can't enter here. And the sage is told, do you want, I'm cutting actually the story very short. If you want to get to the truth, the Vishnu, or gain that moksha, you got a choice. You can spend being 100 years of the best friend of God, Vishnu, or you've got another alternate choice of being the worst enemy of God for 3 generations. Which one would you choose? What are we trying to get at here? I'm giving you the question. This is how they frame it. What are they actually saying by this? Has everybody understood the tale? The sage goes to the center. They don't let him pass. But in order to get to Vishnu, the truth, they give him an opportunity. You've got the opportunity to be 100 years. What do you want? You want to be the 100 years of the best friend of God, or 3 generations of the worst enemy of God? That's how you're going to get there. Which one are you going to choose? What's this significant of? Anybody can guess from what we're saying. Okay, it's difficult to know how to stroke. But go ahead.
They've been given a choice of path of return and path of no return. But it's been packaged in such a way it's not readily visible. Then they choose the path of no return, the 3 lives of being the enemy. Because every time they'll be killed by the Lord, and they get their mukti through that.
So what else can we add on to that? So would anybody want to be an enemy of God or truth? What's it trying to get at here? It's a little tricky story. Well, 3 generations of being an enemy, or 100 years. Well, let's put it Ren.
Okay, let me have a go. If I fight all my demons and get rid of all those desires in those 3 generations, again 3 times, then eventually I can have the eternal friendship. but I have to fight those demons, and that's my time limit, to fight those demons in that time.
Okay. Anybody else? Good. So, Ash.
I guess it's like the I guess it's like the following the easy path or the difficult path. The 3 generations is the difficult path, and the easy path is, you know, having the 100 years, but you're going to return at the end of it. I actually didn't understand initially, but as Renika's explained it as well, I get that now. Yeah, thank you.
So having eternal years of the best friend of God, or say 100 years, we say that sometimes to mean eternal, you're still going to return. You get the heaven, but you're going to return. Whereas you might be the worst enemy, but if it means only for a short period, it's worth doing that. This is the significance of this story. It might be the worst scenario, but if you're objective, that doesn't affect you. If you are doing your efforts to get to the truth, being the worst enemy doesn't matter, because you'll get there, because you're objective. You're not swayed by likes or dislikes, goods or bads. You're just focusing on getting there. That's the idea. So whatever, you're not interested in the best or worst of things. Your job is to get to the truth, nothing else. Get to yourself, nothing more, nothing less. Let's read it.
The path of light, Devyana, leads the seeker to Brahmaloka, heaven, whence he does not return. The path of darkness, Pitrayana, leads the participant also to a heaven. Pitraloka, when Pitrayana leads the participant also to a heaven, Pitraloka, whence he does return to the mundane life of births and deaths. This verse describes both paths as eternal. The word eternal, Sasvata, does not carry its literal sense in the context. It signifies only a relative eternity. A day in Brahmaloka comprises of 432 crore or 4.32 billion earthly years. Likewise is the duration of a night therein. The sojourn in heaven plus thus amounts to a staggering period of time. Also, the period of the samsarika, worldly cycles of births and deaths appears endless. Man's desires are insatiable. His cycle of births and deaths caused by endless desires continues eternally before he gains enlightenment. Both paths, therefore, seem to stretch through endless periods of time.
So it's to be aware that your worldly path is endless. So you may not see the wood for the trees if you don't pull yourself up and out to perceive that. You get caught up in the samsaric world. Sometimes all your desires, worldly attachments, worldly, your thoughts of what you think you've got to be doing in the world. It's never ending. there'll always be something which comes up to do next until you make that decision. It's not about this anymore. "27.
Naite Shriti Partha Janan Yogi Mukhyati Kaschana Tasmat Sarveshu Kaleshu Yoga Yukto Bhavarjuna."
Nishi, if you could read the verse. Thank you.
Knowing these two paths, O Partha, no yogi is deluded. Therefore, O Arjuna, be steadfast in yoga at all times.
So we understand the word yoga. Yoga means to join back to something which we presumably separated from our true self. Same as with religion. Relegare, to join back. Same as with philosophy. Philos, Sophie, one who loves truth. Same as with Vedanta. Veda, Anta, knowledge to an end, a culmination of wisdom to truth. All of these words we keep using every now and again. Nobody knows what they are about, really. If any person knew what religion was about, they won't fight in that name. Mine and yours. There's no mine and yours. There's one unifying truth. We might have different ways to get there, which should be respected. So, the path of the sun or the moon, the yogi is not deluded. Both paths eternal, one path meaning samsara, one path meaning moksha. So even in samsara, if you get on to thinking about getting to truth, fair enough. So we have desires, we're born, we've got a cycle of birth and death. In all religions or philosophies, it's giving that personification that the barrier between you and your truth is that desire. That Godhead within you, the barrier is your desire. It gets clouded over. So it's constantly indicating if you perform desire-ridden activities, if that creeps in, even when you're on the spiritual path, you'll be catapulted just repeating to Brahma Loka at the best, and so forth, if not with that thought of moksha. So he's saying, not some of the time, but all of the time, sarveshu kaleshu, at all times, choose the path which is beyond punya and papa. So that you've got to cultivate, because you've got to even examine, have you chosen a path which is going to gain you punya first of all? You know, are you on that path which even will gain you merit? And if you can recognize that, you can step up and think, I don't want this. You know, there comes a stage when you're actually functioning in life and you think, you know, somebody's going to give you some reward, or you know you're going to get something good out of it, but you're actually not interested in that. Your thoughts on a bigger plane. So you can actually forego that, because it's not even foregoing, you just don't need to have it, where somebody else will be grabbing at it. And that's the way to do it. I get something out of this. But you recognize that's not the way to go. It's not human, it's greedy. It's not falling in the right conscience. You hold on because you can. You know, the people who hold on to things, they hold on to the material because they don't have to give. Nobody's telling them. You hold on to your physical relations because you don't have to give space. You hold on to that emotional value. It doesn't matter if you wreck the scenario because you want you to be catered to emotionally. You hold on to your ideas fanatically because you feel that you're better and superior. So that liberalness to go beyond and think with your subtle intellect of something bigger, grander, comes from being able to do the others. So if you're tight in the others, where are you going to be able to be unselfish, selfless in your spiritual growth? If you're tight emotionally, tight intellectually, fanatically attached, if you are tight physically, always wanting that focus there. If materially you can't give, it's a pain to give. Khalil Gibran says, you give but little when you give your possessions. It's when you give yourself that you truly give. And there's those who have much give little, and those who have little give it all. For those, their coffers are always full, and God smile upon them through their eyes. I'm not sure I corrected, but those who have little give it all. They're always full as well. And there's those who have lots who will not give at all. But who do you cheat? You only cheat yourself. So at all times, sarveshu kaleshu, choose a path which is beyond punya and papa. When you're steadfast in yoga, you don't have that confusion. You enjoy life as much as you like, but you're doing something which is focused on the permanent aspect of life. So here is pointing it out, the urgency to get out of your limitation. Let's read it.
The two paths described in the preceding 3 verses lead seekers to 2 distinct goals. The path of light leading to spiritual enlightenment through heaven. The path of darkness returning the seeker from heaven to the cycle of reincarnation in this world. But a yogi is one who follows yoga, which means union with the Supreme Self. He understands clearly these paths and their respective goals. He does not suffer from delusion and fall a prey to the enchantments of this world. Knowing the goals reached by the 2 paths, he wisely chooses the direct way to enlightenment. Most people in the world remain in ignorance. They do not know the 2 paths and their distinct goals. They remain deluded and confused. Laden with desires, they entangle themselves in the affairs of the world. Pursuing their desires, they go through the endless chain of births and deaths and suffer the sorrows thereof.
So, laden with desires, get confused. So we're all a bit frightened to follow that through. So we get involved in our own desires. It seems scary to think about something bigger. But the minute you think of something more universal, you're freed up. You're freed up. You understand the transient nature of things. Let's read the next.
Krishna lovingly advises Arjuna to break the chain of reincarnation and seek union with the Supreme Self, to practice yoga with steadfastness, with constant and persistent spiritual practice, reach the ultimate goal of self-realization.
Mm-hmm. What would you say if you were asked the question, what's the first What's the thing you've got to do if you embark on your spiritual path? What does it mean to embark on a spiritual path? What is it converse to? What's the first thing you've got to think about? We're in chapter 8 of the Bhagavad Gita. Many years we've been doing that. Ravita, you have something?
Yes, Hari Om. What comes to my mind first thing is you have to learn to detach, start detaching yourself from the worldly desires. And constantly remember that things are temporary. Nothing is permanent. So, yeah, I think that's the first thing that comes to my head.
Okay, good. So where do we build on from that? What we need to do?
Well, with this thought in mind, we have to start when we know our action. We have learned that we have to go on the path of doing our action as a selfless action.
Okay. Okay, good. Nishi, what can you add?
To rid your ego and always pitch to a higher goal.
Okay. Good. So what are we actually doing when we do both of what you said? Both you've said. What is the principle? Vidya?
Viveka and Vairagya.
Okay. So
Need
those
to
are
develop that ability to, I'm going to tell my words, Nitya, Anitya, Viveka, Vairagya, to know and discriminate that which is ephemeral and that which is eternal, and to continuously practice that discrimination in informing our action so that we start pitching on a higher goal every time.
okay. So what's the principle of being spiritual then? So these are the practices. This is what you do. But where do you start? Ash.
You have to have a lot of self-awareness. I think, yeah, self-awareness of your actions, your part.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
So you gain that along the route, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? And all of these are right. You're part and parcel of what you've got to get moving on. It is spiritual well-being is not to look outside, but to look within. You solve yourself. You solve whatever else is going on outside. Your relationship to it will be smooth. You have an understanding what's going on. It's got to start within. You can't look out and see the nonsense of what others are doing. You've got to look at the nonsense of what you're doing, which is very tricky. But that's what you've got to do. That's what we've got to start with. ourselves. Don't worry about somebody else's spiritual development, worry about your own. Unless you're asked, then you better worry about your own so you can be of use to somebody else. If that's only the case. Ash?
Sorry, sorry. I think I have a question in terms of the last sentence with constant, persistent spiritual practice. And I know if you ask what is spiritual practice, which is what your question was, you know, it's working on yourself, it's being disciplined, detaching, and so forth. But is spiritual practice something that comes in similar to what happened to Arjun here, in that you have to get to the lowest to know you want something more? To, you know, when you've had enough of however your world is, that you need to, the desire to come out of that is more than your desires that you normally encompass in the world.
It could be that, but it ought not to be that. That's what could happen to some people. But if you're smart, you won't let that happen. You won't want to come to the end and ebb of the disaster, then you do something. If you're smart, you see it well before that. Yeah. Why should you wait till everything goes wrong and then you become spiritual? This is actually giving you a guidance to be it well before it. You know, it's be that. So in Arjuna's case, he falls on the battlefield, but they're already at a certain stage and status in their spiritual evolution. And it's actually also saying at any stage you can fall.
Sorry, Nish, put it loud.
So, you know, they've got to a certain stage. So it's not that they were devoid of spiritual well-being as such. So sadly, some people come upon their thought to pitch up something spiritual when there's a disaster. But smartly, you would not wait till that. You have an understanding of your reasoning for why you're on this planet. And it's certainly not to collect everything. But when you die, you can't take anything. And you leave a mess for everybody else. So to get on with it a bit better than that. Let's go.
वेदेषु यज्ञेषु तपस्सु चैव दानेषु यत् पुण्यफलं प्रतिष्ठम् अत्येति तत्सर्वमिदं विदित्वा योगी परं स्थानुमुपैति चाद्यम्.
Ash, if you could read the verse. It's okay.
Knowing these two paths, O Bharata, no yogi is deluded. Therefore, O Arjuna, be steadfast in yoga at all times.
Okay, thanks, Ash. I'm going to ask Poonam, would you like to, I'll just explain, but continue after. I think, Ash, your mic's a little bit crackly, or something's crackly. Let's go. Let's first just go through the verse. So this is the last concluding verse, chapter 8. And when you look at the actual verse, Vedeshu Yajneshu Tapas chacheva daneshu. In actual fact, in chapter 17, we've not got there yet. It talks about yajna, tapas. Yajna meaning service and sacrifice. Tapas meaning how you channelize your energies to something higher. And dhanam, give, how you offer. These are principles which enable you to move forward in your spiritual path, the practices. So the thing that we have to be careful about is not to allow these to become an end in itself in our worldly pursuits, because that way you don't evolve, but to actually reach the end of our pursuits. So that it's to do it objectively, not for something you can get out of it. So Vedanta, Yajneshu, Vedeshu, Yajneshu, Tapas, austerity, dhanam, not for the end in itself. So the yogi is not sold by doing this, a true yogi, to get the goods out of it, the punya, the merits. It's like saying you're being sold on it, like if you do these activities as such, it's like becoming a millionaire in the dream. Does everybody understand? A millionaire in the dream you become. What would you say to that?
It's a false narrative.
False narrative. So you understand, we understand. What's the big deal? A millionaire in the dream. As soon as I wake up, I'm the pauper. As such. So it's no use to you. If you can understand that, it's trying to tell us that of how we've got to do the activities. It's of no use to us. So these are essential qualities where they should, to gain that knowledge, to have that tapas, channelize your energies to something higher, not mundane, to have that service and sacrifice, to have that off to put back, to have these qualities is essential in your spiritual pursuit. But when you've pursued them all, you've got to let go. You can't hang on to the fruits, the phalam. So it's very much like you've got to move beyond that. They're not means to an end. They're not means to an end in itself. It's something to take you beyond that. That's the point. It's sort of driving home, even in these activities as such. So it's like the pole vaulter. We sometimes use this example that you use the pole to strive all the way up your karma, bhakti, jnana yoga you do to get all the way, get that height, get that refinement. But when you're in a transition over to the truth, you got to let go of all of that. Not concerned by all the worldly things. Let's go, let's read it. Poonam, if you'd like to read the... Thank you.
Okay, I think I'm on the right page. Just tell me if I'm not. This verse points out those who become involved and entangled in spiritual practices.
Is there a paragraph before that in your book?
Yes, have I missed it?
Yes. The yogi refers to a spiritual seeker. Brilliant.
Okay, I got it. Yogi refers to a spiritual seeker who practices yoga. Yoga means union with the Supreme Self, union with God. A yogi pursues the self most constantly until he reaches it. His vision of the self never falters. He suffers from no delusion. Consequently, he does not fall a prey to any worldly enchantment, never becomes entangled in anything that the world offers. His unswerving and determined pursuit takes him to the self, the supreme abode. This verse points out those who become involved and entangled in spiritual practices, studying the Vedas, performing sacrifices, practicing austerities, and distributing gifts no doubt constitute the highest forms of sadhana, spiritual practice. These practices are only a means to an end. To take the seeker to the ultimate abode of realization, they ought not to be treated as an end in themselves, but some seekers do so. That happens when a seeker attaches personal motives and desires to his sadhana. Sadhana polluted with desires produces mere finite fruits for his
Meritorious
I can't say that. Meritorious deeds. He enjoys these fruits in heaven for a period of time only, to return to the mundane existence. Desire-prompted practices, however noble, do not take the seeker to the abode of truth. A yogi understands the evil of developing attachments and desires while pursuing the spiritual path. Such a yogi rises above these wrong practices, keeps his sadhana going without personal motives. He reaches the supreme state of self-realization, the primal abode of Brahma.
So here we conclude the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So we'll chant the final verse and then the first verse.
Om Tat Sat Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Sri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Akshara Brahma Yogo Namastamodhyaya.
Tim, if you'd like to read the translation of the verse.
That is real. Thus, in the Upanishads of the glorious Bhagavad Gita, the science of the eternal, the scripture of yoga, the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, ends the 8th chapter entitled The Yoga of Imperishable Brahman.
So to acknowledge that we are students and we have the humility that we continue to learn, we chant the first verse of chapter 8.
Arjuna Vacha Kim Tat Brahma Kim Adhyatmam Kim Karma Purushottama Adibhutam Cha Kim Proktam Adidevam Kim Uchyate.
So we end chapter 8. In the tradition of the way we follow at the Academy, normally what we do is we do 4 chapters at a time. And in the break of the 4th chapter, we then normally take another short text and then continue. And perhaps what we haven't done, we've been doing this now for some time, and we haven't considered like what your backgrounds are or the basic tenets of what you know or not know practically. And it's always really good to go back to the basic concepts, which sometimes in the Gita are a lot more, you have to pull apart and chew. So maybe it might be an idea that we take something for some period, a shorter text like Fall of the Human Intellect or something like that, where we actually get the concepts of mind, intellect, love, attachment, what this is all about. It might really help us in the way we think of things out of context of the Gita, and then we come back to it. So I don't know how everybody feels about that, but that might be a way we progress. But it might not be Full of the Human Intellect, it could be another text, but it might be a good idea to do that. So it just gives you a grounding in actually what you're doing. Maybe we can just think about that till next week or something like that. And we'll let you know, or you can let us know if you've got some thoughts on it as well. Or even if you want to look back at some part of what we've covered, we could actually do one of the chapters again, like Karma Yoga, which would be quite something, because we run through it quite quickly. So if anybody's got any thought, let us know in the next day or two. Otherwise, we'll just decide for next week and we'll let you know. Hari-Om.
Hari-Om, Bhari.
Hari-Om.
Hari Om, thank you.
Hari-Om.